Half a millennium ago, it was deported from its home. In Europe, it was thoroughly misunderstood. For a long time, it was maligned as the devil's handiwork. Even when shut up in dark cellars, it didn't lose its astonishing health and strength. Conditions under which others would have crumbled made it stronger. And so, it gradually conquered the world. Origins. The Holy Valley of the Incas, a fertile region and seat of an ancient civilization, traffic artery and pilgrimage route to mystical sites and what are now enigmatic sanctuaries. In the thin air, the Inca rulers founded Cuzco, their capital. Thousands of kilometers of useful transport routes and astonishingly rapid communication links crisscross the rough terrain. All this was ruled and administered from here until the Spanish came. They obliterated the old gods, the rulers and their palaces. Afterwards, they built new temples for a new god and new palaces for a foreign king. Although Francisco Pizarro and his soldiers tried their hardest to destroy the civilization, both the ancient Quechua language and potatoes survived. Unperturbed by the bloody end of the Inca Empire, the nutritious tubers with their seductively beautiful yet poisonous flowers continued to grow on the mountain ranges around Cuzco. Today, they are known as papa andina, Andean potatoes. Around the Andean town of Pisac, El Parque de la Papa spreads over gentle hills, ranging from 3,500 to 5,000 meters above sea level. This is a 9,000-hectare experimental potato reserve. Founded and run by 6 communities of the region, several hundred varieties of potato, some of them very old, are cultivated here. At this far edge of the modern world, they are a staple food on which about 6,000 people subsist. Everybody in this extended family helps to bring in the crop, literally piece by piece. Organic farming is thus completely natural and not the result of a laborious ecological revival. The Parque de la Papa communal initiative does not just feed its members. Its main function is to see how ancient, almost extinct varieties can be brought back to the field and the market. Between 200 and 300 varieties are cultivated in the Pisac highlands. The routes to the fields are long and strenuous, so the farmers still prepare a meal in the fields after work, as they did centuries ago. Up here, the wind always has the loudest voice. Even the most garrulous European visitor quickly notices and falls silent. Memories of old rituals are evoked. Packed in glowing sticks and burning hot clays, potatoes and beans cook for about half an hour. By now, we are no longer sure for whom the oven was built, and whether we are not merely onlookers to the sacrifices for the old gods. Thanks for the fruits of the earth are offered not only to the Virgin Mary, but also to Pachamama, the ancient Earth Mother. From the Peruvian Andes over the continent to the eternally wind-lashed Pacific coast of southern Chile. Here, as archaeologists and botanists have shown, potatoes must have existed for more than 14,000 years. Their original home is supposed to be Chiloé Island, closely studied by Charles Darwin. Social romantics called the island one of the last paradises. Consequently, the picturesque buildings on stilts are found in every prospectus and on every postcard. But then, Bruce Chatwin wrote a story which also mentions Chiloé, titled "What Am I Doing Here?" It's a matter of taste, evidently. The capital, Castro, has nevertheless got a passable cultural surprise on hand. A cathedral built completely of wood. UNESCO rightly designated this and the many smaller wooden churches on the island as a World Cultural Heritage Site. It is not long since Chiloé got electricity. The people subsist on fish, shellfish and agriculture, as well as a little adventure tourism. Those who require medical help must even today be patient and perhaps a little lucky. Maria Aguilar knows how special the tubers are that grow in her garden. Now and again she's visited by botanists from Santiago de Chile and sometimes also from Europe. She has a multicultural mix of varieties ready for them. They all seem to get on very well in the flower bed, as long as they belong to the Solanum tuberosum family, the potatoes.
This is a potato that we like to use in our cooking. During processing, they remain as colorful as they are now, which looks very pretty. Thus, we use them in particular dishes. We call these potatoes tancay. They cook extremely well. They're colorful on the inside, too. These, in turn, are called misune. They cut into good slices for salads. You cook the corracho corrado and cut it up afterwards. You can make a very tasty salad by adding onions and parsley. The next ones here are again particularly suited to cooking. We frequently use them for stews.
Round and dark, long and coloured, juicy or floury, the variety of the original potatoes must have been almost incalculable. The Chilean agricultural ecologist Carlos Venegas thinks that these varieties could someday satisfy world hunger.
The potatoes from Chiloé are an important agricultural product for us. They not only feed us, but they are a living part of our culture as well. They belong to our cultural inheritance, just as they belong to the world cultural heritage. We all know that the potato is one of the world's most important plants, and its origin is in Peru and also here in Chiloé. That is the reason why we here feel responsible not just to harvest it, but also to develop it for the future. For our farmers, indeed for the whole of Chiloé, and moreover for the future development of food resources, because we are steering towards a very difficult situation.
In the gene bank of the Centro Internacional de la Papa in Lima, more than 4,000 different seed varieties are preserved. This should secure the future of the fertile tubers. Whether they had their origin in the Andes, whether they grew to the left or the right of the holy paths between Cuzco and Machu Picchu, whether they came from the banks of Lake Titicaca or first saw the light of the sun in southern Chile, will occupy scientists for a while longer. Occasional rivalries between Peru and Chile about the origin of the potato are nothing more than an amusing marginal phenomenon. The potato is also at the heart of a crunchy chapter of modern cultural history. The European art form of the deep-fried potato finger has become an element of international fast food cuisine. How and where the fried potato chip came into being, we shall see in about 20 minutes. Roots to Europe. Exactly how and when the potato was looted from its homeland and taken to Europe will probably never be clear. Two routes appear likely. Perhaps they reached Spain on the ships of Francisco Pizarro. The Spaniards had already secretly been carrying the patate as provisions for some time. It came to England, so legend has it, with Walter Raleigh and Francis Drake, as booty taken from the Spanish by the privateers of the English Queen. So the papa took Europe with a pincer movement, via the Iberian Peninsula and the British Isles. The Austrian poet H.C. Artmann tells us, however, that an English slave dealer had already brought the potato to England in 1565 and given them his name. He was called Potately Hawkins. In Ireland, they were widespread soon after their arrival. Nearly half the population was dependent on this cheap foodstuff. This would lead to a catastrophe in the mid-19th century. In the rest of Europe, the earth apples, as they are known in various languages, did not do so well. They were, like tomatoes, demonized and derided. For a long time they were restricted to being ornamental plants and to botanical gardens.
The flowers and leaves of the specimens in botanical gardens were admired, but no one really knew what the plant could do. So apart from these botanical experiments, you had the church, which demonized the potato. Growing underground is a bad thing for a start, so all roots were accused of having bad humours. That was the humour theory. You have good humours and bad humours in your body, and if you eat certain things, then the good or bad humours are encouraged. So the potato fell into the bad category, and then, of course, the potato was the staple food of a wild, unchristian people, and therefore considered bad from the start, and thus unacceptable.
Die Erdäpfel waren das Grundnahrungsmittel eines wilden, natürlich nicht christianisierten Volkes, und da war sie sowieso von Haus aus schon.
The church spent a long time fighting against the potato, even when learned men had recognized that it could be used to feed the people and to combat famines.
Nahrungsmittel sein könnten und dass sie Hungersnöte bekämpfen könnten mit den Erdäpfeln.
Fighting famine with potatoes. It took a long time for the people of the old world to reach that conclusion. There, you had to wait for a soldier king who recognized the military value of the tubers. Many rejoiced rather in the beautiful blooms in which many a princely table was decorated. Their fruits caused sickness and could even be deadly. Europeans thus became increasingly distrustful of this strange import from the New World, and the true value of the tubers hidden in the dark beneath the ground remained unrecognized. Potatoes are a local product, best suited to the needs of the family. On the one hand, they have modest natural requirements, and on the other, they give a considerable yield. More than 85% of the whole plant is edible to humans. The figure for cereals is just 50%. They are an ideal crop for the small farmer. With 2008 proclaimed as the International Year of the Potato, the UN wanted to highlight these favourable attributes and increase the use of potatoes in the fight against world hunger. By order of the King. Sanssouci Palace in Potsdam. Frederick the Great of Prussia created it as an idealistic counterpart to a life shaped by severity, drills and war. Frederick was, however, not sans souci, without a care, even here. On the 14th of March 1756, he decreed the wide cultivation of the cartoful as a useful and beneficial root, good for humans as well as cattle in many ways. Cartoful came from the Italian word for truffle, as they were similarly hidden in the soil.
Frederick the Great did something quite simple. He planted potatoes in his gardens around Potsdam and had the plantations guarded during the day by his soldiers. Of course, the peasants thought they must be really valuable, and they stole the potatoes in the night.
Frederick had realised that with Cartoful he could feed and keep his favourite and most expensive political plaything, the army, in good strength. Furthermore, they could protect the civilian population from famine. The marketing trick of the Prussian ruler was thus a godsend. The Irish catastrophe. From the 18th century, potatoes fed Europe, but in the middle of the 19th, the blessing became a curse. A plant disease was introduced from America, spreading ever further in Europe and blighting the crop. Everywhere there were food shortages, but nowhere did potato blight have such a drastic consequence as in Ireland. At that time, around half the population lived in poverty. When the potatoes failed for several years, and because there was also no more seed stock, the disaster struck.
So what caused the famine was the repeated failure of a crop which had become central to the diet of, one could say, nearly half of the population. A third of Ireland's population at that time relied almost exclusively on the potato as their food. So you're talking about 3 million people out of 8.5 million. The problem was, of course, that in retrospect, the people had become too dependent on the potato, and when it failed, there was no trading down. There was no food that was cheaper so that people could substitute, and they could say, okay, we've saved a little money, we can't eat potatoes, but we can buy something else which doesn't cost as much. That option wasn't available. So when the potato failed so disastrously, there was going to be a catastrophe, unless private and public charity stepped in a massive way. And there was, of course, and there's a big literature about this, and it's still a rather debated, controversial issue, but there was a failure of public policy and an incapacity to deal with the magnitude of the problem for a variety of reasons.
Like, for example, overpopulation and overall economic, particularly industrial dependence on England, widespread unemployment, a lack of social policies, poor medical provision, housing shortages. Practically all the indicators which can drag a country and its inhabitants into the abyss came together. Agriculture was completely controlled by large landowners. Workhouses were established for homeless farm labourers. As the famine began, these quarters, which resembled prisons rather than social housing, became terribly overcrowded. Those who did not have the strength to leave the country died here. So-called famine ships lay ready for the emigrants.
Major Dennis Mahon was the landlord who inherited the estate here. He inherited the estate in 1845, the beginning of the Great Irish Famine. The estate had been ran into debt by his predecessor. There were many rent strikes, there was no money coming in. On the advice of his agent, John Ross Mahon, the advice was, clear your lands, emigration on an extensive scale. Major Dennis Mahon took up this advice during the famine, and mass eviction followed on this estate. At one point, Dennis Mahon chartered famine ships, and he put a little over 1,000 of his tenants onto these ships and sent them to Quebec. Due to overcrowding, unsanitary conditions, and the physical condition of the people that were chosen to go on these ships, by the time they arrived at the quarantine station on the island of Gros-Isle, just outside of Quebec City, less than 300 people had survived the journey out of over 1,000. Word came back, 2 strokes down, about this disaster. And shortly after this, in 1847, Major Dennis Mahon, the landlord, was returning to his estate after a meeting in Roscommon town, not too far from here, and he was assassinated. He was the first of the landlords to be assassinated during the Great Irish Famine.
The Irish famine of 1845 to 1851 cost the lives of around 1 million people, and about 1.5 million more emigrated. One of the causes was the monoculture. Only potatoes in the fields, a terrible mistake. Strokestown House in County Roscommon is today a museum in memory of one of Europe's greatest and most recent peacetime catastrophes. A new home. Apart from the Irish catastrophe, after the initial distrust, the cartoful, cartoffeln, patate, potatoes, pomme de terre, brambury or erdäpfel developed into a vital basic food. Also in Austria too, they gradually became generally accepted, despite the resistance of the church. Today, they stand in 3rd place among the world's foods. Around 315 million tons of them were produced worldwide in 2006. It was inevitable that the diversity of varieties would be reduced. For years, increasing importance has been attached to organic cultivation, as for instance in the fertile area around Stockerau in Lower Austria. Not by hand, but still carefully and individually, the seed potatoes are planted in the chemical-free earth. Such care can only develop in a closed cycle of quality awareness, from the mind of the farmer via clean soil and chemical-free storage to the environmentally aware consumer. Food for all? In the old Inca city of Cuzco, nutrition experts, FAO representatives and agricultural ecologists met in early 2008 for an international potato conference to discuss how the old wonder tubers could be used increasingly as a weapon in the fight against global hunger. The UN estimates that the world's human population will grow by around 100 million per year. Particularly in the poorer countries, the increasing nutritional needs cannot be met by rice and grains alone. Therefore, we need potatoes. But again, as Frederick the Great found out, it's not possible to change traditional eating habits without institutional pressure.
Potatoes is becoming a more important alternative for food security, but also for many of the countries in the developing world, income generation. Because it's not just a staple starchy food, it's a horticultural crop that has a high value in many markets in the developing world. So we're trying to look at giving a higher visibility to the potato as the third most important food source for the planet, and also the role that it has to contribute significantly to food security and poverty reduction in the developing world.
A few potatoes growing round the house can feed a family. Unlike maize, potatoes are not at the mercy of the profit-motivated greed of the biofuel producers. They are hardly traded on world markets and futures exchanges, and in Europe have so far escaped the excessively strict EU farm regulation.
The potato has played a very specific role in Europe because, contrary to most of the other crops, the potato has no market regime, which means that politically the European Commission has never involved itself into the potato culture. It is a culture which is free. Farmers grow as much of potatoes as they want to, as the market wants. So it's a very market-driven product. And as such, perhaps it's also an idea to make use of this approach when we want to work together with poorer countries.
Those buying regional products enjoy a piece of pure homeland and also support their regional agriculture. This idea is promoted in Austria's largest region with the initiative Taste of Lower Austria, standing also for quality of life, environmental and climate protection. Around 17,000 hectares are planted with potatoes annually in Lower Austria, GM-free and often organic. They are therefore an important factor in local agriculture. Because they are locally processed, they reach consumers while still fresh. The short transport routes are also good for the local environment.
The AMA seal of quality is based on 3 criteria, the first of which is the Austrian origin. That means the potatoes must be produced and processed in Austria. The second is the high quality criterion, which means the farmers must use varieties typical of the area and production must be as near natural as possible, meaning you should use manure or spray with pesticides only if absolutely necessary. And finally, the harvest and storage must be carried out very carefully. The third pillar is independent control. Every grower is monitored annually. Samples are taken regularly and checked for residues of chemical agents.
The tubers are a delicate cargo once they are taken from the homely dark of the soil. In the regions of Lower Austria, Upper Austria and Burgenland, a cooperative project of 120 growers, with the uncompromising name of Pur or Pure, produces around 20,000 tons of organic potatoes annually. Despite all the technology, the organic farmers nevertheless work with nature and ensure they harvest at full ripeness. This requires much knowledge and great care. The potatoes are checked virtually one by one, only to disappear into darkness again almost immediately. While technology was still praised as the measure of all things, the first organic farmers were considered sectarian or at least naive utopians. This situation has changed completely. It may not be an insignificant factor that large, major retail chains have adopted and promoted the organic idea with gusto. thus helping the breakthrough.
We really work together with the organic growers of the region. This brings two benefits. One, it supports small farmers in Austria, and two, it means lower CO2 emissions. Here, many additional things are done for the environment at the same time. We could not start with just the organic farmers that were there at the time. There was just too little product. They specialized in farm gate sales and supplied health food shops. It would have been impossible to get into a chain with this quantity. So, more farmers, producers, had to be won over for organic production, and that was definitely not easy. It was only made possible by awarding longer-term contracts to the producers, the farmers, with a purchase guarantee and a price guarantee many years into the future. We now have more than 20,000 organic farmers in Austria, which is equivalent to about 14% of Austrian farmers and about 15 to 16% of Austrian agricultural land. But 26 years ago, when I began as an organic farmer, we met in smoky cellars of guest houses. We were persona non grata. We were not particularly liked, neither by the politicians who didn't really want us, nor by the scientists who said, this doesn't work, nor of course by the government. This has changed substantially. Austrian organic farming has become one of the main advertisements of Austrian agricultural policy.
Another stroke of luck came originally from a misunderstanding. The ups and downs of the potato's history would not be complete without the genesis of a truly international consumer product of daily culture. The world of French fries. Let's start this chapter by clarifying a further misunderstanding. Frederick the Great did not invent chips, although they were allegedly named after him. Nor did the French come up with the idea of slicing their pommes de terre into little chips. Chips originate from Belgium, to be precise from Wallonia, the French part of the country, and they are some 230 years old. Throughout Belgium and the Netherlands too, they are the most widespread fast food. On the banks of the Meuse, somewhere between the quaint old towns of Namur and Dinant, in the winter of 1781, there was a new stroke of potato luck. In hindsight, it is regarded as a crucial historico-cultural episode. Potatoes were in fact only the second choice of the people along the Maas. As a substitute, they proved particularly useful and digestible.
It's a very old story, and people used to eat a lot of fish from the Meuse, and it was quite common in the summer period. But unfortunately, in the winter, the Meuse was frozen, and they had recently discovered the potato, which was coming from the Canada, and this is why we call in the local language sometimes the potato Canada. And they used to cut in the winter period, to cut the Canada in slices in the form of fishes and put them in the boiling oil, which was a replacement of the fish.
The harbour master casually mentioned another route from America to Europe for the potato, their French connection via Canada. As soon as the ersatz fish were born, they overtook their role models in popularity. From the point of view of culinary history, a star was born on the banks of the Meuse in the winter of 1781. More than 100,000 tons of potatoes are processed annually in this factory in Hollerbrunn in Austria, mostly for chips. Planned with military precision and precisely controlled, the homely potato mutates into appetizing chips. Crisp outside, soft inside, yet firm to the bite. The next potato misunderstanding can be dispelled. Chips don't make you fat. With proper preparation, their fat content is only between 6 and 9%. For more than 40 years, the factory has procured its potatoes for chips, croquettes, dumpling dough or salad from the near neighbourhood. The consumer can thus, in some way, whether at home or in the fast food chain, enjoy the principle of French Nouvelle Cuisine. The first maxim of Maître Bocuse was, "Freshness will only come to the table from what grows by the door."
Consumers in Europe, particularly in Austria, want to know, to feel where their food comes from. They don't want anonymous food. Here, for example, we reflect the consumer trend with the Bauernland brand, with the farmhouse guarantee, where we can trace the end product, these chips, back to the farmer and even to the fields the potatoes came from. That is a guarantee. It's on the back of the packet. You can go there. You can call the farmers. You can see the fields. And that is what people want to have again today.
Centuries ago, and without technology, the Incas developed the principle of convenience food in the dizzy heights of their realm, the chuño. After harvesting, the tubers are naturally freeze-dried in the air. They are left out to freeze overnight, so their water content is reduced. By day, they dry in the sun. This method is repeated over several days. After this, they are ready to store and simply need rehydrating before consumption. The convenience products of the large supermarkets are a modern and practical development of this tradition. The simple native cuisine of northern Lower Austria was invoked by no less than the great poet and potato connoisseur H.C. Artmann, when he began the literary defence of the purity of potato goulash. Potato goulash. At Engelhard auf der Wieden, we had Artmann's purest dish reproduced for his widow, his publisher Ulrich Schulenberg, and their friend Heinz Maracek. Artmann called potato goulash the poor man's ambrosia. For 2 average eaters, you need 1 kilogram of waxy potatoes, 500 grams of onion, 100 grams of diced bacon, 1 heaped dessert spoonful of paprika, 1 heaped teaspoon of salt, and hot water. No other ingredients, just the correct state of mind. About this, he wrote, "One is to be clean-shaven, the moustache is to be tidy, fitting to the occasion. One is to go into the garden and look at the roses in the flower bed, enjoy the daffodils and irises, do a calm round of the pond, and compose a short poem." Then, happily smiling, one is to go into the clean and tidy kitchen, put on a white apron, clean one's hands and nails, and dry them on a warm towel. One can really say then, Artmann continued, that the potato has ended the age of the capon. It is a truly democratic food for which, ironically, we have a slave merchant to thank. No bay leaf and no garlic, to the surprise of some present. Good food for poor people.
Ein echtes arme Leute essen im Waldviertel, wo man die kahlen Winkel
With the Austrian national dish, well, almost, prepared to the purity requirements of a famous poet, a stroke of culinary luck, in other words, we end our excursion through the adventurous cultural history of the potato.
Ich bekomme nicht.
It's superb, tastes wonderful. It's a bit of a side dish. I would really like some meat to go with this.
Eines toten Tieres daneben, wo man das dazu isst.
Yes, that reminds me. Back then, we also added a chopped sausage. I have to say, there's a real difference between writings and reality.
I find it excellent. I can understand that you wouldn't want to miss meat, but I find it good. And every time I visit the Vienna area, I head for this potato goulash again. Germany has no equivalent. The purely scientific question is obvious. Do you eat potato goulash with a spoon or a fork? Or with spoon, fork and knife? I would advocate following the Maracek method. Mashing the potatoes is clearly better, so you need a fork. You need a spoon afterwards for the juice, which is essential in potato goulash. In any case, in my opinion, knives are out.